Sadasya grayar arham vai. You did better than I did. Vimshrisanta sabasada. Nadya gachamanai kantyat. Sahadevas tada bravit. Sadasya, of the members of the assembly, Agra, first, Ardhana, worship, Arham, him who deserves, Vai, indeed, Bimrishantaha, pondering over, Sabha, in the assembly, Sadaha, those seated, Na ajagachan, they could not come to a conclusion. Anaika antyat, because of the great number of qualified candidates. Sahadeva, Sahadeva, the younger brother of Maharaj Yudhisthira. Tada, then, abravit, spoke. BBT translation. The members of the assembly then pondered over who among them should be worshipped first. But since there were many personalities qualified for this honor, they were unable to decide. Finally, Sahadev spoke up. BBT purport. Srila Prabhupada writes, quote, another important procedure is that the most exalted personality in the assembly of such a sacrificial ceremony is first offered worship. This particular ceremony is called Agra Puja. Agra means first and Puja means worship. This Agra Puja is similar to the election of the president. In the sacrificial assembly, all the members were very exalted. Some proposed to elect one person as the perfect candidate for accepting Agra Puja, and others proposed someone else. Unquote. As the great Acharya Jiva Goswami points out, text 15 of this chapter states that the members of the assembly were not astonished at the opulence of the sacrifice, since they knew that King Yudhisthira was a devotee of Lord Krishna. Still, text 18 now states that the assembly could not select the most deserving candidate for being worshipped first. This indicates that many of the brahmanas present were not fully realized transcendentalists, but rather conventional brahmanas uncertain of the supreme conclusion of Vedic wisdom. Similarly, Acharya Vishwanath comments that the undecided members of the assembly were less intelligent ones, and not such exalted personalities as Brahma, Shiva, and Dvaipayana Vyasa, who thought, quote, since today no one is asking our opinion, why should we say anything? Furthermore, there is Sahadev, who is renowned for his sharp skill in analyzing all sorts of circumstances. He can help appoint the person who is to be worshipped first, only if he somehow fails to speak or cannot understand the situation will we speak up, despite no one's having inquired from us. Unquote. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur often does that. He often puts dialogue into his commentaries. Having made up their mind in this way, the greatest personalities remained silent. This is how Vishwanath Chakravarti advises us to understand what occurred in the assembly. Sadasya gra yarhar anyamvai vimshrisanta shabasadaha nanya gachan anaikantyat sahadevas tada bravit. The members of the assembly then pondered over who among them should be worshipped first. But since there were many personalities qualified for this honor, they were unable to decide. Finally, Sahadev spoke up. So I remember when I was visiting the temple in Chicago, which is where I ended up actually joining the Hare Krishna movement. So I went there, it was the winter time, and I went there to buy ostensibly to buy some incense and some oils. You know, the devotees ran this spiritual sky company. Of course, the oil quality was not very good, but anyway, be that as it may. So, you know, I wasn't at that time anything of a connoisseur of such things. I didn't know at that time, when I was 17, what I know now, but anyway, putting that aside. So I came to the temple, and I had these, it was winter, so I had these lace-up boots. I had these knee-high lace-up boots, and this brahmachari came to the door to open the door and said, "You need to take off your shoes." And I said, "I don't want to take off these boots. They were complicated to take off." And he said, "What have you come for?" And I said, "Well, I came for some spiritual sky oils and incense." And so then he got me some, which I paid for, and we spent 2 hours there on the stairs, because I didn't want to come in. So we spent 2 hours there on the stairs in discussion. And he was trying to convince me to join the Hare Krishna movement. And I said, "But I don't want to accept any authority." You know, this was the day, first of all, I was 17, and second of all, this was the days of the counterculture, where there were bumper stickers that said, "Don't trust anyone over 30." And it was a time of rebellion. We were rebelling against the greater society and the authority of the society. And he looked at me and he said, "You're already accepting so many authorities." And I thought, oh my goodness, he knows. Because I knew this. I thought, actually, there's no way you can live without authority. And I felt very conflicted about this. You know, you can't live without accepting authority, but I want to reject all these authorities. What do I do? And he revealed this inner hypocrisy of mine. And then he said, "Why don't you just find the one authority that's actually a valid authority?" You know, so I thought about that for about 2 days, and then I came back to the temple, and that time I did take off my boots, and I had a meeting with the temple president, and I said, "I want to live in the ashram." I was 17, and I was at that time working at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago as part of my university training. They required we had 2 months of paid or volunteer work every year during January and February. So I was working there, and so my parents didn't know that I stayed at the temple for 2 weeks, and actually not being a minor, it was actually illegal, but anyway, I did. So that was what happened at that time. But that was the thing that changed my mind, was him saying, "You already have so many authorities, why don't you find out what is the best authority and accept that?" So all of us need to accept authority. We're very small. You know, we might not like to remember how small we are, but we are extremely small. If you've ever seen any of those things where they show the universe, you know, it starts out with some view of the Milky Way and the cosmos, and then it goes down to our solar system, and then it goes down to Earth, and then it gets smaller and smaller, and you see, you know, how tiny we are in the universe. Or some of those graphics, they start with a human, you know, start with you there on the Earth, and then zoom out and 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 zoom out. And our whole solar system is a speck in the galaxy, and our galaxy is a speck in the universe. And, you know, Prabhupada had this conversation once with Tamal Krishna Maharaj. They had a very interesting relationship. And Prabhupada said, you know, that in the whole universe, this Earth planet is insignificant, and on the Earth planet, you know, America is insignificant. On the Earth planet, Los Angeles is just a tiny dot. And in Los Angeles, this street is a dot, and on this street, Tamal Krishna Maharaj is a dot, and he's thinking he's the most important person. So, you know, we're very, very small, and we don't know very much. We really don't know very much. Even if we know a lot, still what we know is a tiny, tiny fraction of what there is to know. So like I have a PhD, which makes me literally the highest authority on this planet of the job satisfaction of the teachers in Hare Krishna schools in the fall of 2005. So I know a tremendous amount about very, very little. And that's what happens as you progress in education. You're actually supposed to, for your PhD thesis, do something that no one else knows anything about. You're supposed to find something original. So you find some teeny drop of knowledge, and then you become the world's leading authority on that. Yes. So in other words, we need to have authority. We need to have authority on so many things. What they call feral children, children who are brought up without adult human beings. They often don't properly develop language. Right? Without some authority, they never function properly. So then the question becomes, who do I take as an authority? I mean, and this is a question, even if we want to look at something very ordinary and mundane, just like where I stay in America, there was a dentist that I was seeing for decades, and he's now retired. Also, the insurance that I get as an older person, as a senior person in America, wouldn't cover that dentist anymore anyway. So I had two reasons I had to find another dentist. My dentist retired, and I needed a dentist covered by my insurance. So how am I going to figure that out? Who's a good dentist? How am I going to know? There's so many dentists in the area. Then I have to ask other people's opinion. Who do you think is a good dentist? Who do you think is a good dentist? What's your experience? What's your experience? And then check, is it covered by my insurance? Oops, nope. Okay, and I'm looking online. Nowadays, we also look online. We ask, what are the reviews? Who gets a 5-star review? And my co-author for Career Dharma, Rukmini, she says, I always read the 1-star reviews first. What are they complaining about? So, right? And then looking at all these authorities, we make a decision. So if we have to do this to find a dentist, I did find a good dentist, by the way, and if we have to do this to find a good dentist, how much more so do we have to do this to figure out who is God? Who is the Supreme Person? So in this Rajasuya Yajna, they're trying to figure out who to worship first. And here it's pointed out that Srila Jiva Goswami says that just a few verses previous to this, people were saying, well, of course Yudhisthira is opulent because he's a devotee of Krishna. And then right after that, they're like, well, who do we worship first? I don't know. I don't know who to do that. So in order to find some authority, we generally go to people we already trust as an authority. And we can also directly examine that person's activities, and then we can directly examine the result of having that person as an authority. So first we can ask somebody else who knows, like I ask my friends or I ask reviewers. So this is what's happening in this assembly. They're discussing among themselves. And as stated here in the purport, as actually stated in the verse itself, there were many, many qualified persons there. I mean, not only were the most qualified persons on the whole earth there, but even from other planets. Of course, this sounds pretty far out to us in 2024, but even today, sometimes residents of other planets come to visit. My late godbrother Sadhaputta Prabhu wrote this book, Alien Identities, of all the empirical evidence that people on this earth have dealings with those from other realms, both lower realms and higher realms. I mean, and Sadhaputta Prabhu points out that if we neglect this testimony, we would have to neglect all human testimony. We wouldn't be able to have court cases with human testimony. You can't say, I disbelieve all these thousands and thousands of people who otherwise are very solid, honest, sane, upright members of society. So there's still some dealings with beings from other realms. Prabhupada sometimes would say that in the kirtans, Narada Muni was attending the kirtan. Right? And I have a devotee friend who said that when he was a little boy, he saw a gorgeous airship with beautiful, effulgent people in it. And he was like, oh, what is that? So many examples. But in former times, it was much more open to see demigods. You're going to a big sacrifice, and there are the demigods. So that's not common today. If we were to have a yajna tonight to start Kartik, we don't expect that we're all going to visibly be able to see Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma show up. Of course, sometimes they also come in disguise. Like at the time of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's appearance, it says that the demigods came in disguise. They looked like local brahmanas from the village. Right? But here at the Rajasuya, they're openly there. Everyone knows there's Lord Shiva, there's Lord Brahma. I'm sure that if the main demigods were there, that other demigods were there as well. And they would sometimes come and mix in human society. Again, there's many accounts of this phenomena, not only in the Vedas, but in all the ancient cultures of the world. I mean, it says that in the Old Testament also, that the gods and the giants used to walk on the earth among humans, and sometimes they would have children together, which of course we also have these examples in the Vedas. There's an African tribe, I forget the name of it, where they have vast knowledge of astronomy, which they attribute to having social dealings with beings on another planet. And the knowledge they have of astronomy can only be confirmed by very high-powered telescopes. It's not the kind of thing that these people would have been able to just see with the naked eye. Anyway, so they're also there, and still they're disagreeing. So the most qualified people are having a disagreement. And this puts us in a quandary. You know, this even happened to me with finding a dentist. I had one case where one lady said to me, one lady devotee, "This is a great dentist." And her husband said to me, "Don't go to him, he's terrible." You know? I said, "But your wife said he was good." She said, "Don't listen to her, he's a terrible dentist." So, you know, there's sometimes this kind of a disagreement, and you don't know what to do. Different people say different things. I was talking the other day how they have disagreements even in Vaikuntha. You know, who's the supreme? Is it Vishnu or Krishna? I mean, even in Goloka Vrindavan, there's disagreements. The cowherd boys or the gopis, they may disagree about how to serve Krishna and what Krishna wants, and what we should do. It's not that everyone is just, yes, we all agree about everything. But this makes it confusing. And when people, you know, if you just take somebody in the world and they say, "I want to find God." Okay, I want to find God. How can I find God? Actually, this also relates to my own personal story, because from the time I was 4, I said, "I want to find God." And I asked my mother, I said, "Why are we Jewish?" And she said, "Well, because my mother's Jewish." I said, "Well, why is she Jewish?" She said, "Well, because her mother is Jewish." Why is she Jewish? I remember this. I was 4. I was talking to my mother in the living room. And after a while I said, "Well, that's stupid." I said, "We should do what is true." And then I went on a search for God. How are you going to find God? You know, every religion is going to tell you something different. You know, they're not going to agree. And even within one religion, they're not going to agree. Does everybody, even within ISKCON, agree about everything? Definitely not. Even about some, you know, what should be, we would think, philosophical points with which we would imagine we would all agree. I mean, we will have disagreements from minutia, you know, which deities can wear a peacock feather on the altar, and whether you should first offer the incense to Prabhupada and then to the deities, or first to the deities and then Prabhupada, and people are arguing about this for years and years and years. And we also have disagreements on philosophical issues. When we teach hermeneutics, we list difficult passages from Shastra, and we also list topics that are topics of disagreement, and some of these disagreements are very heated. Some people are very invested in these things. So, you know, there may be disagreement. And then also, some people who know may not tell you if you don't ask them. Like Srila Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur was saying that Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva, they're like, "Well, we know, but nobody asked us." I was once at a festival where the sound equipment wasn't working properly, and I'm sitting next to our oldest son. And I say, "Do you know how to fix it?" And he says, "Yes." I said, "Well, go fix it." He said, "Not unless somebody asks me." I said, "I'm asking you." He said, "No, they have to ask me." I'm like, "Okay." So you also have to know who to ask. You may not know who to ask. and they may not volunteer the information. This is a problem. Now, one thing that comes out here that is very interesting and unusual, it's kind of an anomaly, is that who's the person who knows? It's Sahadev. And it's really interesting. You know, I mean, in one sense, okay, it's Yudhisthira's sacrifice, and this is Yudhisthira's brother, but you would expect that maybe Yudhisthira would know. It's his sacrifice. Sahadev's the younger brother, and he's living in a society where those things were considered extremely important. I don't think in Belgian society those things are that important. We don't say, I have to defer to my older sibling. Correct? It's not such a big deal. But in former times, birth order was very important. And you treated your older sibling practically like you treated your parents, and you treated your parents. I don't even think it's true anymore with parents, is it? How many of you offer obeisances to your parents every morning? Krishna and Balaram used to do that. They would go every morning and offer obeisances to their parents. This is no longer operating in most of the world. We've rejected authority in most of the world, haven't we? Because authorities become corrupt. The religious leaders became corrupt. The government leaders became corrupt. Parents became corrupt. I no longer assume that everybody had a functional upbringing. Right? When Prabhupada says, call for Krishna like a child calls for his mother, saying that might traumatize half the people in the room. They're like, you don't know my mother, I'm not calling for her. Talked to her for 25 years. So this is husbands have become corrupt. So many cases of abuse. So, this concept that you respect the elders, it's falling out of favor in most of the world for good reason. But here you have this younger brother. And Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma, according to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, they're thinking, we hope Sahadev says something. They say, no one's asked us, we're not going to say anything because no one's asked us. But we really hope Sahadev says something, which he does. And it's also interesting, he has a few verses of saying something, and then everybody says, yes, that's it. Then it goes on. Sahadev is seen as the authority. Of course, later Shishupal contests it after the worship is completed. And I remember Hridayananda Maharaj pointing this out and saying, I think it was him, saying that Shishupal wanted to cause a disruption. So he waited till the worship was finished, and then he said, actually, this wasn't proper. Whereas if he wanted to object in a proper way, he would have objected right after Sahadev said something and before the worship was actually done. So that Shishupal's motive was not to find the proper person, his motive was to create a disturbance. So when we're looking for a proper authority, we have to keep in mind that not everybody will agree. And we talked about this the other day, that one reason not everyone agrees, the main reason not everyone agrees about who is God, is because God is a person, and therefore he's perceived differently by different people. Another reason may be that even people we think are qualified are not, and that's what Srila Jiva Goswami's point is. But although many of these people were very exalted, they didn't have the qualifications. Of course, this removes the problem one step. How do I find people who are qualified to tell me who is qualified? You follow? Just like if you're looking at reviews online, how do you know the reviewers are qualified? And we have a problem nowadays that some people are paid to write reviews. They're not qualified. You can't trust their review. So who's qualified also to give a review? Again, then I have to figure out the qualifications of the people who are telling me about the qualifications. And the problem that I may have to ask somebody. I may have to seek someone out and ask them. They might not volunteer the information, and they might not volunteer the information even if they're in my presence, and even if I'm asking generally. there's studies done that if you're in some kind of an emergency, and what's the number you call here when there's an emergency in Belgium? 112. Okay, so let's say you have an emergency and there's a crowd, you're in a car accident, you're lying on the street, and there's a crowd of people gathering around, and you just call out, call 112, call 1. You're less likely to get someone to do it than if you say, gentleman in the blue shirt, can you call 112? This is what the studies show, that if you ask a particular person, because if you just put it out in general, everyone may think, well, that's for someone else. Yeah. Right? This was the problem when Atri Muni, when he's doing worship for the Supreme, I want the Supreme. And Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma, and Lord Vishnu all came. We don't know who you want. Of course, then each of them, he said, well, I want the Supreme as my son. They said, well, we'll each give a portion of ourselves as your son. But fascinatingly, when Gajendra was calling for the Supreme, nobody else came. Because they thought, oh, Gajendra knows who he wants. He's very clear who he wants. So the other demigods didn't come. They're just watching. But anyway, the point is, if we just call for help, somebody help me find God. So even a qualified person might be silent. Therefore, one also has to find out who is qualified to tell me, who can give me instructions. Right? If you want to get directions to someplace, some random person may not know. And there are some countries where the culture is that if you ask someone for directions, they have to tell you even if they don't know, by the way. They have to tell you something. And then the other thing is that we might be surprised who's qualified to tell us. It might be someone junior. Like Sukadeva Goswami himself. He's only 16. And his father is sitting in the assembly, hearing from him. You know, this concept, and of course we could apply this to the idea, I mean, here I am, in this body sitting here, but we could also apply this to the concept of women as priests and women as guides. Somebody will say, well, you know, socially, traditionally, women had a lower position in human society. It's like, well, that's kind of beside the point. That's irrelevant. You know, I'm sure if any of us met Jatayu, who's a vulture, or Hanuman, who's a Vanara, we wouldn't hesitate to take instruction from them about who is the Supreme, even though ostensibly, you know, they're not even human. They're animals. So sometimes the person who actually can enlighten us about who is God may be a surprising person. It might not be like Prabhupada often talks about, that if someone's not a devotee, they don't know, even if they're a big scholar, even if they're a big professor, even if they're a big religionist. So it might be somebody that we haven't considered. All right, so we have some guidance here that we should seek those who know, and we should intentionally ask those who know. We should expect that there's going to be disagreements. We should expect that we're not going to get a unanimous opinion. And we should sometimes look for the fact that that knowledge may come from people who are surprising. Another example of a surprising person is, we mentioned the other day, Jad Bharat. So King Rahugana was in his palanquin, and he's being carried for a palanquin you need 4 carriers, and one of them had gotten sick. And so they needed another carrier, and they see this man walking, and he looks like he's not very smart. He looks like he's not very sophisticated. He's dirty. He has on a Brahmin thread, but it's dirty. And he's acting in the world, as we were saying, like he was dumb, deaf, and blind. But he was young and strong, and so the other carriers said, oh, he's suitable. We can get him. But as he's walking, he wasn't that concerned about pleasing King Rahugana. He was concerned about pleasing Krishna. And so he's thinking, I want to make sure I don't step on any bugs on the road. And because of this, he was kind of weaving around. He was making the palanquin weave around. And King Rahugana got very angry because he had this idea, I'm the king. I should be carried steadily in a palanquin. And so who's doing this? Oh, sire, it's the new man. And then he's rude to Jadabharata. Oh, I see you're just old and frail and useless. That's why you can't do anything. And then somehow other Jadabharata decided, and I don't know why, the Bhagavatam, the Acharyas don't know why, they don't explain why. Jadabharata broke his lifetime of silence. He hadn't said anything when the dacoits were going to kill him in front of Kali, but now he said something, and he says, you know, I'm not really strong or weak or fat or skinny or old or young or, you know, and you think you're the king and I'm the servant. But, you know, in his previous life, he had been the emperor. He said, but you never know, you know, in another life, I might be the king and you might be the servant. And he starts preaching this whole philosophy. And King Rahugana, he said, the devotees of the Lord, the saintly persons may be in disguise. He said, I'm not afraid of anything, including the thunderbolt of Indra or the punishment of Yamaraj, but I'm afraid of offending a saintly person. And I think I've done that. I think I've offended you because I didn't recognize you because you were in disguise. So we keep that in mind. The person may be somebody that we wouldn't think of. Might be someone who's young, might be a child. Prabhupada was so happy with little 3-year-old Sarasvati that would go to people and say, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay, but that may not be enough. We also want to look at the person's activities and behavior. Just like if I'm looking for a dentist, do they have a degree from dental school? I was talking with some devotees while I'm here that one who's young and looking to find career, but studied for something and now I want to do something else, and another one who already has a career and wants to make a change. And in both cases, they need some further education. And we were talking about, you know, getting the certification, right? Being certified. So you look for that. If you look for who's a good dentist, are they certified? Do they have the stamp of approval from the dental agency? And what are they experienced in? You know, you don't really want to be their first patient to get the operation. I mean, somebody has to be, I suppose, but you generally don't want it to be yourself. Is this the first time you've ever pulled a tooth? Well, yeah, you know. I mean, you get it cheaper that way, right? If you go to the dental school. I can tell you a whole story about that. But anyway, so you want to look at their qualifications. What are their activities? What have they done? So here we look at Krishna's activities. Who can rival Krishna's activities? I know Prabhupada would often say, so many people can say, I'm God, and then say, well, show me your universal form. And then they'll say, well, you don't have divine eyes. And say, okay, lift Govardhan Hill. They'll say, well, I can do a Ras Leela. And say, really, can you do a Ras Leela where you expand yourself into thousands and thousands of forms? Can you do that? Can you have 16,100 wives in different palaces? I was hearing Prabhupada talk about some sultan or something who had like 100 and something wives. But he said, you know, Prabhupada was giving the mathematics, how often each wife would see her husband. So that's not impressive. You know, I see my husband twice a year. But Krishna is, you know, Narada Muni goes from one palace to another and he sees Krishna's in each palace. And he sees that in each palace Krishna is doing something different. You know, I was once doing a home program and I was told in advance that a number of the people at that home program worshiped this man who claimed to be God. I'm not going to say his name here publicly, but anyway. Then someone asked me, how do you know who is God? And I said, well, for one thing, God is the most beautiful. And there was pin drop silence in the room, and I was told that many of them rejected this so-called God after that. So what are their activities? What, you know, if you want to find who is God, the Shastra gives descriptions. Prabhupada talks about this a lot. This is when the incarnation comes. This is their parents. This is the signs. They have certain signs on their hands. You know, if I want to say, I'm God, but you look at my hands and you say, well, you don't have the markings. You have that Pandraka who thought he was God. And he even had 2 artificial arms. Now, I was told he got those arms by the benedictions of Lord Shiva. So they probably didn't look quite like the arms in the old Indian movies. You know, otherwise I don't know how anybody could have been fooled. You've seen those old Indian movies with the guys that have like these tinfoil arms or something, you know. Tinfoil crown, and cartoon arrows in the sky. So, but I'm sure he didn't have the marks on his hands and feet. And I'm sure he wasn't supremely beautiful. So what are the person's activities? What are their qualities? What are their behavior? We can see by the activities of Krishna that only God could perform these activities. And he's able to supersede the activities of the demigods. We have these examples where there's battles between Krishna and Shiva, and Krishna appears victorious. Or, you know, Lord Brahma gives demons benedictions that are problems, and Krishna solves the problem. Lord Shiva also gives demons benedictions that are problems, and Krishna solves the problems. Or they have their, you know, when Lord Shiva is trying to fight the aerial cities of the demons, and he succeeds, but then the demons are brought back to life by Mayadanava, and again it's Krishna as Vishnu who solves the problem. So we find that comparing Krishna to the demigods, that his activities are supreme, his qualities are supreme, his behavior is supreme. And then also we can judge ultimately by the result. What's the result? What happens when you worship Krishna? What happens to other people? What happens to us? So here, for evidence, I always like to cite Bhagavad Gita 9:2. Raja Vijja Raja Guyam Pavitram Idam Uttamam Prachaksha Bhagamam Dharmam Susukam Kartam Avyayam. So if I'm actually in touch with the Supreme Absolute, Raja Vidya, I should gain in knowledge. I should gain the highest knowledge. And I should actually be able to assimilate it. Rajaguyam, I should be able to understand the essence of things. Do we have this experience? I mean, I had experiences like this, you know, the first few days staying in the Hare Krishna movement. That you're just like, oh, now I understand this. Oh, now I... Yes, everyone's had this experience. And I remember being, you know, at age 18, being at O'Hare Airport in Chicago and distributing Prabhupada's books. And I had, you know, by that time I'd read Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita and I'd read Krishna book. But, I mean, it took me 2 years to understand the personalities in Krishna book, you know, who's Duryodhana, and what to speak of pronouncing their names, you know, to really understand all this. And still I could philosophically defeat anybody in the airport. It was like, wow, that's really something. Like anyone who came to argue with me, there was no question. And I remember very clearly, like a few months of being in the temple, I had read Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila, chapter 7, which is where Lord Chaitanya is debating with Prakasananda Saraswati, this impersonalist. And I just like really devoured that chapter, practically memorized the arguments, and then at the Sunday feast one Indian gentleman was talking to me and he was making all the impersonalist arguments. It was like we had a script or something, you know, from the chapter. And it was all very fresh in I couldn't do that right now because it was very, very fresh in my mind, and I just... But everything I was giving him was either from Lord Chaitanya or from Srila Prabhupada. And afterwards he looked at me and he said, "You're the most intelligent person I've ever met." And I could say, it wasn't my intelligence. So one can see what are the results in oneself. Or Ravindra Swarup Prabhu, he talks about how he first started chanting Hare Krishna and he lost his interest in smoking. He just, all of a sudden, just like, I don't really want to smoke anymore. And then he said he stopped chanting for a while because he thought, what's this doing to me? You know, let me find out some more about this. It's changing me. I mentioned the other day that there's a leading Catholic theologian. Yes, I mentioned him the other day. He's written many best-selling books on Catholicism, and he regularly draws thousands of people that come to his lectures. And he became a devotee of Krishna, although he still acts as a Catholic, a guide in the Roman Catholic Church. And his journey happened, his brother had cancer, and the doctors advised a vegetarian diet, and so the whole family, to support him, took up a vegetarian diet. Like sometimes, you know, cancer patients, they lose their hair in chemotherapy, and sometimes other friends and family will shave their head. So everybody took up a vegetarian diet. So for about a month, he was vegetarian, and then he saw a billboard near a temple where he lived that said, "Chant Hare Krishna," and it had the mantra. And so he became intrigued. And he went online and he you know, did a search for Hare Krishna, and he ended up, what came up first on his search were Prabhupada memory videos. So he ended up watching many, many, many videos of devotees talking about Srila Prabhupada. And then he decided from that he would try chanting Hare Krishna. So he got the recording, you know, there's 2 recordings of Prabhupada chanting japa, and one is slow. By the way, it's 11 minutes around. And you can ask me later how I know that. But anyway, so he decided to listen to that recording and chant with Srila Prabhupada. So he'd play that recording of Prabhupada, and he would chant at the same rhythm along with Srila Prabhupada. So he's hearing Prabhupada chant while he's chanting. And he said within like 2 weeks that many of the things he had been struggling with for years just left him. And he said, I've spent my whole life as a religious person. He was raised in a different Christian denomination. He said, I've spent my whole life as a very religious person, and I've done so many religious practices on a daily basis. He lives as a monk, and he's particularly attached to St. Francis. And he told me, he said, my celibacy is a gift. It's what they call in Catholicism a charisma. He said, I don't practice celibacy as a discipline, but as a charisma, which is a whole other topic, which is an interesting topic, but it's a different topic. But anyway, he said, I judge that Krishna must be God because of the effect it had on my life. Another interesting story in this regard is one of our devotees named Nityananda, and he was in Fiji, Indian in Fiji. He was a Shiva Bhakta, and he was also a lawyer and very highly placed with the government. He had a lot of connections with the government in Fiji. So next door to his home was a house that was purchased by the devotees when they first came to Fiji. And in the beginning days of our practicing Krishna consciousness, we did not have an ISKCON communications department. In fact, we would have thought that having such a department was total Maya. We didn't really care what anybody thought of us at all. Like, not at all. We said everyone who's not a devotee is a hog, dog, camel, or ass, and we have no interest and use for their opinions. So that was kind of our mood. So this house in Fiji that the devotees got, they decided to put speakers on the outside of the building. You can see where this is going, right? And they would broadcast all the kirtans, starting, of course, with Mangal Arti. Yes. Let's purify the neighborhood. So they had, unbeknownst to them, one of the most powerful political people as a next-door neighbor. Again, you can understand where this story is going to go. So he's a powerful lawyer, powerful political connections. So he comes to the devotees and asks them to cease and desist, and did they listen to him? No. He's a hog, dog, camel, and ass. Why should they have anything to do with them? So he asked them politely, and then a little less politely, and a little less politely, and then he started bringing legal action against the temple, and he was taking out big advertisements, wealthy men taking out big advertisements in the newspaper, and so forth. So this was becoming a rather uncomfortable situation. So Tamal Krishna Maharaj was the GBC there and the zonal guru there. So he came to visit, and he was told about this problem. And he said, well, ask this man to meet with me. Okay. So they asked the man, they said, you know, our leader has come here and he's willing to meet with you. And the man was actually, he felt, oh, something will happen. You know, the leader is going to meet with me. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj told them, make him wait to see me. So give him an appointment, but then make him wait. You know, Srila Rupa Goswami, when he describes that Krishna is all honorable, the evidence for Krishna being all honorable is that he makes the demigods wait. So they're all waiting in the waiting room, Krishna's waiting room. And the secretary comes out and says, "I'm sorry, Varuna, I know you had an appointment, but you'll have to come back another day." Krishna doesn't have time. "And Indra, you're reciting your prayers too loudly. Could you please be quiet? And Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma, I'm sorry, you're going to have to wait a little longer." And this is the evidence that Krishna is all. This is how we know someone has status in society, right? Going back to my dentist. I have to wait for the dentist. I can't go there and say, "I have an 8 o'clock appointment." They'll say, "I'm sorry, you have to wait till at least free." So Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, made him wait. So they made him wait. Anyway, then he came to see Tamal Krishna Maharaj, and please don't try this. Don't imitate what he did here. Please don't do that. So Tamal Krishna Maharaj had a particular type of personality, and etc. Anyway, so he says to this lawyer, he says, "I want you to try full-on Krishna consciousness for 1 month. And if after 1 month you're not convinced that what we're doing is right, we will close our operation here in Fiji." So don't try that. And so he agreed. He said, okay, so he's following the principles, chanting 16 rounds, waking up early, offering his food, the whole thing. The whole thing, as we say, the whole kit and caboodle. And do you say that too? Do you say kit and caboodle? I have no idea where that expression comes from, but anyway, the whole thing. And after 2 weeks, his whole life changed. His whole mentality changed, and he's like, oops. Oops. And then he had a dream where Lord Shiva appeared to him in a dream and said, "Become the disciple of Tamal Krishna Maharaj." I heard this story right from him, So he goes back to Tamal Krishna Maharaj. He says, Krishna consciousness works. He says, okay. He said, you have to, stop your court case against us. And now you have to pay for new full-page ads glorifying Krishna consciousness and glorifying. So he did that, and of course he became a devotee, and he's actually one of the leaders of our movement in North America. Wonderful, wonderful person. But the point is that one should see who is in authority by what works. Right? We were going on with 9.2, we didn't finish 9.2. So Rajaguyam, we understand Rajavidya, Rajaguyam. Pavitram, you experience it directly. Right? You experience directly. I become pavitram. I become purified. All these examples I'm giving. Pratyaksha, you directly experience it. You become purified. Prabhupada says you don't have to ask somebody, have I eaten enough? Unless you're diseased or something. But for most of us, we know if we've eaten enough. Sukham, you become happy. I was hearing a lecture the other day from an old lecture from New Vrindavan. And Prabhupada was saying, we Krishna conscious people were happy. He said, we don't see the material world as suffering. We see the material world as happy. So you should see the result. And of course, you should also see the result in the lives of others. Like Krishna says to Arjuna, King Janaka, and so many other people. They became purified by worshiping Krishna. So we can ask others, try to find who is a proper authority, realize that some of the authorities may be hidden or not so obvious. We can assess the person's activities, and then ultimately we judge by the result. But we do have to accept some authority. We cannot say, I'm not going to accept any authority. Even if you're an atheist, you have to accept somebody's authority. How did the world exist? How was it created? If you're going to say, well, I don't accept your four-handed blue god floating in the sky in the other room, well, then you're accepting that there was an infinitely small, infinitely dense chunk that appeared out of nowhere and exploded and made galaxies and solar systems, which is just as far out of a story, in my opinion. One story, you follow? One story isn't less or more fantastic than the other story. So everyone has to accept some authority. Anyway, amazingly, they all accept the authority of Sahadev. And they actually say, yes, although there are so many qualified people here, great demigods, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of God. So, questions, comments, additions, subtractions, chastisements? Yes?
I never understood really the difference between Vishnu and Krishna.
You never understood the difference between Vishnu and Krishna. Well, that's because there isn't any.
Okay, no, but you mentioned in the beginning of your lecture, you mentioned Vishnu or Krishna.
Yes, okay.
Or Krishna.
So do you have a job? Do you work?
No.
You don't. Have you ever worked?
Yeah.
You have. Okay. So when you go to work, are you a different person than from when you're at home, or the same person?
Different.
But you're also the same person, right?
Yeah.
So you're both a different person and the same person. Like that.
Okay.
So in this world, the Vishnu that appears in this world is Krishna at work.
That's how you explain.
Now, in the spiritual world, Vishnu there is Krishna in his majestic aspect. And I don't know what it's like here, but in the United States, the president has they have the White House in Washington, D.C., and then they also have a place called Camp David, which is a country place. And they often do political business there, too. There's some very important world, political negotiations that have gone on at Camp David. But they can also go to Camp David to relax. They can also go there to take a vacation. And then, of course, the president also, they don't give up their original home. So they might have, their original home might be in another part of the country. Because, they're only president for 4 years, 8 years max. So they keep their own home. And sometimes they go on vacations in their own home. So they have their place of majesty, they have their place of, I'm the president. And then they have their place where they're just, Bob. They're just a guy. So Krishna has Vaikuntha, where he's God. And then he has Vrindavan, where he's a village boy. And so he's displaying different aspects of his personality. And when he's displaying himself as God, he's Vishnu. When he's displaying himself as a village boy herding cows, he's Krishna. But he's the same person. And he's not only the same person as Krishna and Vishnu, but he's the same person, and we talked about this the other day when you weren't here. He's the same person in a multitude of incarnations, some of which look like animals. He's got incarnation of a fish, and of a turtle, and of a boar. And they're all the same person.
Are the persons close to him, the persons close to him, are they also part of Vishnu? The Panchatattva or Balaram?
Some of them are, yeah. Like Balaram is it's also an expansion of himself. See, when I'm at work and I'm home, I can't be in both places at the same time. I'm at home or I'm at work. But Krishna can be at home and at work simultaneously. And he can talk to his different expansions of himself. I can kind of do that. I can talk to myself. But it's not the same. I can say, so Urmila, where would you like to go after Belgium? Well, I don't know. I think I'd like to go to I do have sometimes conversations with myself. But I'm just in one form, whereas Krishna can have expansions and have conversations and activities with himself in different forms. I can't do that. I can't, at least not in this manifestation. I can't expand and go to the seashore with an expansion of myself. But Krishna can do that. Yes, Tattvavipu.
Thanks for the class. It was really good. There's one very minor point that I'm going to ask a question about.
Okay.
I'm not asking a question because...
Just go ahead. It's all right.
What's this term, pharaoh children? And
Feral.
can you remind me again what it means?
Yes. Feral means not domesticated. So, like wild.
Not Egyptian pharaoh.
Not Pharaoh, not P-H-A-R-O-H. No, F-E-R-A-L.
Okay.
Yes, not Pharaoh children. Thank you. But feral. So just like, people keep dogs and cats as pets. So, but sometimes there are wild dogs and wild cats. They're feral cats. They don't belong to anyone. They have no master. And there are feral dogs. And, you know, sometimes even among domesticated animals, some of them escape and become feral. They go into the wild. So there are feral children. There are children who have been found, not many of them, obviously, but there are children who have been found living in a forest, and they're already 10 years old. And some of them never walked. They're getting around, they're crawling around, they're jumping around, they don't walk, and they don't have language. And somehow they grew up, and they must have been in the forest from a very, very young age, without exposure to other human beings. So there aren't many feral children, but there are instances like that. And without contact with other humans, if they're feral long enough, I don't know what the age is, but there's like a window of opportunity for learning language, and at least one of them never learned to walk upright. So I've made that point with, we all have to have authority. If you don't have if you don't have human adults around you, or at least older children or something, you're not going to develop a lot of the abilities that we think, well, yeah, I can walk and I can talk, but we actually needed authority to learn that. Without authority, we didn't learn that. That's also true in some animal species as well. Some animals, if they don't have contact with the parents of their own species, they develop abnormally. So like I was talking to someone who works with dogs, and they said if you take the puppies away from their mothers too young, then the puppies become antisocial. They were telling me how they visited a devotee's house, and they had a dog that was very troublesome. It would bite people, and it was very, very troublesome. And they found out the people had got the puppy when it was 1 week old. And they said, then this puppy they're untrainable, and it will never be normal. It had to learn, they said, it had to learn how to be a dog from its mother. And because it never learned from its mother how to be a dog, it could never be a normal dog. So that's not true with all animal species. With some creatures, they learn directly from Krishna in the heart. But, you know, with many, many living entities, we have to have some authority to learn from. So that's true even for things that we take for granted, that we just think, yeah, I would have just walked anyway. Well, no, you might not have. Yes.
Thank you for the lecture. Many wonderful points. I was wondering, when we are seeking for an authority in general, there might be different situations where we are looking for some authority in a different way. So, in which situations should we just settle with what we see, like the best we can get? And in which situation should we not stop searching for that person who really matches those qualities and activities and symptoms and the result of what they're doing, if that all fits?
When should we settle?
Yeah, when should we settle, and
when should we just settle, and when should we not settle?
Yes.
So there was an article I read many years ago telling people that in marriage you should settle. Don't look for the perfect spouse to marry. It was written by a woman who'd waited too long to marry and was already, older, and decided, now it's too late. I've passed my expiration date. And she ended up, what they do nowadays many times, she ended up having a child intentionally having a child out of marriage with some fertility clinic or something. And then she said, then that made her even less marriageable. And she wrote a whole article, and she said, stop looking for Mr. Perfect and be willing to settle. Of course, then you have to also admit that you're not perfect, and so why should you deserve the perfect person when you're not perfect? So I think I wasn't trying to find the perfect dentist. If I tried to find the perfect dentist, then by the time I found the perfect dentist, I would have lost my tooth. Right? So, It depends what you're... First of all, is the perfect person even available? Can I marry God? Probably not. And second of all, what's practical to do? Now, if you're looking for God, please don't settle. Please don't settle. Don't just take anybody who comes along and says, I'm God. Right? That's what we read in the last verse of the Chaturshloki. That everybody at all times, in all circumstances, should always look for what is the absolute truth. If we're looking for the absolute truth, you should go to the absolute. But with most other things, we have to settle somewhat for various reasons. Right? I can't fly the best seat on the best airplane because even if I had that much money, I wouldn't use it for that purpose. Do you understand? I wouldn't pay like 25,000 euros for one flight. So I'd rather be in a cramped seat for 8 hours. So, when it comes to God, yes. And also, how much time do you have? How much, like I was saying with this woman talking about who you're going to marry. If you're looking for the perfect person, then you're going to get married for the first time when you're 87. It's not going to be very favorable. So how much time do I have? Where can I look? What is this about? But for God, yeah, go for the top. Don't settle.
And when it comes to the spiritual master?
Well, if you don't have someone who can give you God, but the spiritual master is not God. Do remember that. Don't look for a spiritual master who's God. Strotriyam Brahmanishtam, that's the qualifications. Strotriyam, they should have heard, and that means someone coming in disciplic succession, not someone coming and saying, well, I'm going to be a spiritualist. Well, who's your master? I don't know. Brahmanishtam, they should be fixed in the absolute truth. Can they deliver Krishna to you? Don't expect the guru to be God. Can they deliver Krishna to you? Can they represent the disciplic succession? Strotriyam Brahmanishtam, those are the two qualifications that you're looking for.
Thank you very much.
Is that all right? So don't settle for less than that. But don't think that I have to find God as my guru.
Is finding a spiritual master who had a spiritual master, who had a spiritual master, who had a spiritual master. Like my mother was a Jew, her mother was
Does that remove the problem? Well, that what we're talking about in the first place, that if you find the people who are qualified to tell you who's God, then you have to look at the qualification of the people who are giving you the qualification. It removes it one step. So then you also have to look at the other things as well. Look holistically. But no, what my mother brought out was just something biological and ethnic and cultural. We practice this religion because it's the tradition in our family. This was the question that Krishna asked Nanda Maharaj. Are you doing this yajna just because it's a tradition? Are you doing it because it's in the Vedas, or are you doing it just because it's a tradition? And basically my mother's answer was, well, this is our tradition. And I'm like, well, so what? I don't care what your tradition is. I want to know if it's true or not. Maybe it's a stupid tradition. I don't know. That wasn't a good enough answer. But no, if you're not hearing, like you want to go to a doctor who's learned from a doctor, who's learned from a doctor, who's learned from a doctor. You don't want to go to someone who just like, well, I figured this out on my own. So like that. All right? Is that all right? You definitely don't want to wait so long to find the guru that you die without a guru. And I know people who do that. We have people in the Hare Krishna movement, they've been in the movement for 30 years and they're still like, well, I don't know. So, at some point one has to decide, I'm going to take this guidance. Prabhupada also said not that a guru is a particular man, but a guru is a principle. And whoever is representing that principle is Guru. We're looking for somebody who's going to be a transparent via medium. Someone who can give me Krishna. And if we want to be followers of Srila Prabhupada, and we want to be members of ISKCON, then we're looking at someone who can give me Krishna in Srila Prabhupada's mood, someone who can give me access to Srila Prabhupada. Was that right? Srila Prabhupada ki jai.